White hotel staff accuses black woman of theft, unaware she's the owner. Imagine owning one of the most prestigious hotels in the city, a place you've devoted your heart and soul to, perfecting every detail to create a luxurious sanctuary for travelers. Now, picture deciding to visit your hotel anonymously, dressed in casual clothes, eager to experience your establishment from the perspective of an average guest. No formal greetings, no special treatment, just a simple check-in, a meal, and an opportunity to see if everything is up to the standards you set. But what happens when you are met with cold stares, dismissive comments, and, ultimately, shocking discrimination from your very own staff? This is exactly what occurred to Rebecca Taylor, a successful entrepreneur and hotel owner who walked into her hotel wearing jeans and a plain shirt, hoping to blend in. Little did she know the way she was dressed, and perhaps even the color of her skin, would lead to her being turned away, denied service, and ultimately escorted off the property by security, all without the staff realizing that she was the very person who signed their paychecks. The irony was hard to ignore. Rebecca, the architect of this grand hotel, had meticulously built a brand that was meant to welcome everyone with warmth and class. Instead, she found herself judged and dismissed simply because she didn't fit the superficial image her staff had in mind. What would you do if you were in her position? Would you reveal your identity immediately, or would you keep it hidden, digging deeper to uncover the full extent of the issue? Stay tuned as Rebecca's story unfolds with unexpected twists, uncovering a network of prejudice and corruption within the very walls she created. This is more than just a story about facing discrimination. It's a journey of standing up for fairness, equality, and truth. Follow along as Rebecca goes from an unrecognized guest to a determined owner, set on reclaiming her hotel and ensuring it becomes a place where everyone, regardless of their background, is treated with respect and dignity. You won't believe the surprising turns this story takes. Rebecca Taylor, a successful hotel owner, had built her career and reputation from the ground up. Owning a luxury hotel had always been her dream, and she poured every ounce of passion and energy into making it a sanctuary of elegance, comfort, and top-tier service. But after years of overseeing operations and watching her staff cater to guests from a distance, she decided it was time to experience her hotel from a different perspective, that of an average guest. No reserved greetings, no special treatment, just an anonymous visit to her pride and joy. On the day of her unannounced visit, Rebecca opted for a simple outfit, well-worn jeans, a plain t-shirt, and comfortable sneakers. She wanted to blend in as much as possible, hoping her casual appearance would allow her to slip through unnoticed by her staff. The decision was intentional. She knew she would only get an authentic experience if her team had no idea she was watching. As she glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror before stepping out of her car, she took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and curiosity about what awaited her inside. Rebecca's heart swelled with pride as she walked through the entrance of her hotel, taking in the splendor she had worked so hard to create. The lobby was nothing short of magnificent, every inch a testament to her vision. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm, inviting glow across the polished marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Elegant art pieces adorned the walls, and the subtle aroma of fresh flowers mixed with the luxurious scent of leather and wood from the plush furnishings. The gentle hum of conversation and soft background music added to the ambience, creating an atmosphere that felt both lively and sophisticated. For a moment, Rebecca simply stood in awe, watching guests and staff move seamlessly through the space. Her hotel looked exactly as she had envisioned, an oasis of beauty and refinement. She noticed the concierge assisting a group of guests with a genuine smile and saw bellhops carrying luggage with ease, as though their service was a practiced art form. The sight brought a smile to her face. Everything appeared to be running smoothly, at least from her initial perspective. Feeling reassured, she made her way to the front desk, ready to request a room. She wanted to see the check-in process from a guest's point of view, observe the kind of welcome her staff extended to an everyday visitor. As she approached the desk, a young man in a crisp suit stood behind the counter, busy tapping away at his computer screen. Rebecca waited patiently for a moment, but as time passed, she noticed he hadn't looked up or acknowledged her presence. Clearing her throat lightly, she stepped forward, hoping to draw his attention. The receptionist glanced at her briefly, his eyes barely lifting from the screen before he returned to typing. His expression remained indifferent. Rebecca was slightly taken aback but decided to brush it off, thinking he might be busy or distracted. She waited a few more seconds, but when it became clear he wasn't going to greet her, she finally spoke up. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I'd like to check in, please." The receptionist raised his eyebrows, finally giving her a full look. But instead of a welcoming smile or an offer of assistance, he merely frowned, his gaze scanning her from head to toe. She could feel the judgment in his eyes as he took in her simple clothes and lack of luggage. Without a hint of warmth in his voice, he responded, "Do you have a reservation?" Rebecca, taken aback by his coldness, calmly shook her head. "No, I was hoping to book a room for tonight." The receptionist's expression shifted slightly, as if assessing her worthiness to stay at the hotel. "This is a luxury hotel, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with subtle condescension. "We maintain a certain standard for our guests here. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at another hotel nearby." Rebecca felt a pang of shock at his words. She had always dreamed of her hotel being a place where every guest, regardless of appearance or background, felt welcome. Yet here she was, standing in front of her own receptionist, being dismissed without a second thought. Her cheeks flushed slightly, a mix of surprise and disappointment bubbling up within her. "Is there a problem with booking a room here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, though her frustration was growing. She hoped her calm tone would encourage him to reconsider his attitude. The receptionist sighed, clearly uninterested in changing his approach. "We're quite full at the moment," he said, though Rebecca could see the guest ledger on his desk indicating multiple rooms were still available. "Like I said, maybe another place would be a better fit." Rebecca's initial shock began to settle into something else, an uneasy realization. She knew that if she revealed her identity, the man would likely apologize and scramble to make things right. But this wasn't about her. It was about understanding how her staff treated all guests, especially those who didn't meet their preconceived standards. She decided to press on, testing the boundaries of his hospitality. "I'm willing to pay whatever the rate is," she said, her voice still calm but firm. "Could you please check for availability?" He hesitated, his face tightening with irritation, but finally began typing begrudgingly into his computer. After a moment, he gave her a brief nod. "We have one room available," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't thrilled about it. "Thank you," Rebecca replied, her patience wearing thin, but she still held on to her composure. As she finished the check-in process and took her room key, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her chest. The disappointment she felt was deeper than she had anticipated. How many other guests had been turned away or treated with indifference simply because they didn't fit the image her staff seemed to expect? Walking away from the desk, Rebecca resolved to dig deeper. This encounter at the front desk was just the beginning. She intended to see for herself if this was an isolated incident or if it reflected a larger, more troubling attitude within her hotel. As she took her first steps toward her room, she knew she was about to uncover the true state of her business, one interaction at a time. Rebecca Taylor, still reeling from her uncomfortable check-in experience, decided to press on, silently observing the behavior of her staff without revealing her true identity. She couldn't shake the chill that had settled in her after being dismissed so abruptly. There she was, in the very hotel she had dreamed up, funded, and managed, only to be treated as though she were unworthy of the comfort she had created. After the encounter at the front desk, Rebecca decided to test the service in other parts of the hotel. She made her way to the main lobby area, intending to sit for a moment, take in the ambience, and observe how other guests were treated. As she watched, she saw other patrons approach the front desk, each receiving cheerful welcomes and warm, engaging smiles from the staff. A well-dressed couple arrived, and the same receptionist who had dismissed her minutes earlier was all charm and attentiveness, even offering to upgrade their room to ensure the finest experience possible. Rebecca felt a pang of frustration rise within her, realizing the stark difference in treatment. She wondered how many guests had experienced the same type of disregard she had, simply because they didn't look the part. Determined not to let this single encounter define her entire hotel experience, she walked over to the hotel's restaurant to test the service there. As she approached the entrance, she was greeted by a hostess standing behind a sleek, polished podium. The young woman, with a distant look on her face, barely glanced up as Rebecca approached. "Good evening," Rebecca said, hoping her polite approach would make a difference. The hostess finally looked up, her eyes sweeping over Rebecca's casual attire. Her brow furrowed slightly, and a faintly patronizing look flickered across her face. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone cool. Rebecca replied, "No, I was hoping I could get a table for one. It's just me." The hostess didn't bother to check the reservation book or even glance into the dining area. "We're fully booked tonight," she said briskly. "Maybe you could try somewhere else nearby." Rebecca was stunned. From her vantage point, she could clearly see multiple empty tables scattered throughout the restaurant. It wasn't even peak dinner time yet, and there was no visible rush of patrons waiting to be seated. She felt a sinking feeling in her stomach, realizing that the problem seemed to go beyond a single dismissive receptionist. Not one to let something slide without understanding the full picture, she decided to probe further. "I understand, but are you sure there's absolutely no room? I can see a few open tables right now," she said, gesturing toward the vacant spots with a polite smile. The hostess barely glanced in the direction Rebecca indicated. "They're reserved," she replied curtly, her eyes narrowing as if daring Rebecca to push the issue further. Rebecca felt her patience begin to wane. The attitude, the dismissive tone, and the reluctance to even make an effort to accommodate her. All of it grated on her in ways she hadn't expected. But she maintained her composure. Years of running a successful business had taught her the importance of keeping a level head in tense situations. She leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice. "Are you turning me away because of the way I'm dressed? Or is there another reason you're not willing to serve me?" The hostess shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by the question. For a moment, she hesitated, her confident facade cracking just enough to reveal underlying discomfort. But it was brief. She quickly regained her composure and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we are fully booked. If you'd like, I can recommend a few other places that might be more suited to your needs." The last word hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Rebecca felt a surge of indignation rise within her. She could reveal her identity in an instant, watch this hostess's attitude dissolve into apologies, and perhaps even see her scramble to make up for her behavior. But doing so would cut short her ability to see the full picture. No, Rebecca thought. She needed to understand just how deep this issue ran, to know if this was merely a problem with one or two staff members or if it was a cultural issue permeating her entire establishment. With a controlled breath, she nodded politely. "Thank you, I'll explore other options," she said, choosing her words carefully. Rebecca turned and left the restaurant, her mind now racing with a mixture of frustration and sadness. This hotel was her creation, a place where she had envisioned an atmosphere of inclusivity, luxury, and warmth for everyone. The fact that her own staff was turning away guests based on appearance or attire, and likely other judgments she hadn't yet seen, was a bitter pill to swallow. Determined to keep digging, she decided to sit in the lounge for a moment, thinking through her next steps. As she took a seat, she couldn't help but notice how effortlessly the staff attended to other patrons around her. Their interactions were marked by friendliness and professionalism. A group of guests nearby, all dressed in fine attire, were offered refreshments and complimentary treats as they waited. Yet Rebecca, sitting alone in her casual outfit, was ignored as if she didn't exist in their world. Rebecca's thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "Everything running smoothly at the hotel?" The timing of the message was almost laughable. For a moment, Rebecca considered replying with the truth but decided to hold off, not wanting to escalate the situation before she fully understood the scope of the problem. Her thoughts were still racing when she noticed another member of the staff, a well-dressed man in a sleek uniform, glancing in her direction. He approached her, his expression formal but polite. "Good evening, ma'am," "May I assist you with anything?" he asked, though there was an edge to his tone that felt more like a formality than genuine hospitality. Rebecca decided to take him up on his offer. "Yes, actually," she replied. "Could you please direct me to the nearest elevator?" The man nodded, but there was something in his demeanor, an air of reluctance, as if he didn't truly want to engage with her. He pointed toward the elevators and gave a short, almost dismissive smile before walking away. Rebecca's heart sank. The small, consistent signs of indifference and subtle prejudice were piling up. Each interaction painted a clearer picture of an issue that went far beyond a single rude receptionist. She couldn't help but wonder if this was how they treated a guest who merely appeared to be of a lower economic status. How would they respond to others who didn't fit their unspoken standards? Before heading up to her room, she made one last attempt to see if her experience would improve. She approached the concierge's desk, hoping that this part of the staff might break the trend of discourteous behavior. But as she reached the counter, the concierge, a middle-aged woman with a meticulously styled appearance, looked up, gave Rebecca a cursory glance, and then returned her attention to her computer without a word. "Excuse me," Rebecca said after a few moments, hoping to get the woman's attention. The concierge barely lifted her eyes. "Yes." Rebecca forced a smile, masking her growing frustration. "I was wondering if there are any local recommendations for dinner nearby?" The woman's lips pressed into a thin line as she looked at Rebecca, clearly unimpressed. "There's a diner a few blocks down," she replied curtly, as if the mere act of speaking to Rebecca was an inconvenience. Rebecca felt an overwhelming sense of disappointment. She had designed this hotel to embody a refined, welcoming atmosphere, a place where everyone would feel valued and catered to. Yet here she was, treated as if she were less than undeserving of the hospitality she had worked so hard to cultivate. She left the concierge desk and finally made her way to the elevator, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She felt embarrassed, saddened, and above all, betrayed. The prejudices she had witnessed weren't isolated incidents. They were signs of a deeper cultural flaw within her hotel, one that she hadn't recognized until now. As she rode the elevator up to her room, she resolved to take action, but she would do so carefully and strategically. Revealing her identity now wouldn't address the root of the problem. No, she needed to fully understand the extent of the issues within her hotel's walls before she could confront them effectively. With that decision made, Rebecca prepared herself for the challenging journey ahead, determined to reclaim her vision for the hotel and ensure it became a place of respect and inclusivity for all. After her disappointing experience at the front desk and her unsuccessful attempt to gather recommendations from the concierge, Rebecca decided to return to the hotel restaurant one more time. She thought maybe, just maybe, her earlier experience had been a fluke. Perhaps the hostess had genuinely misjudged the availability of tables or had been preoccupied with other tasks. She took a deep breath, shook off her growing frustration, and approached the restaurant entrance once again. The hostess, the same young woman as before, was standing behind the podium, scrolling through a tablet with a distant, disinterested look on her face. When she noticed Rebecca approaching, she let out a small sigh, clearly unenthused about their interaction. "Hello again," Rebecca said politely, hoping to make this exchange a little more pleasant. "I was wondering if there's a chance you might have a table available now?" The hostess looked up and, without even glancing toward the restaurant seating area, shook her head. "As I mentioned earlier, we're fully booked," she replied flatly. Rebecca glanced past the hostess, her eyes taking in the numerous empty tables scattered throughout the room. Some were set with fresh silverware and menus, clearly prepared for guests. Rebecca's patience was waning, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I see quite a few open tables," she said, pointing toward the vacant spots. "Are those reserved?" The hostess's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, they're reserved," she replied curtly, not bothering to elaborate further. Rebecca's patience was growing thin, but she maintained her composure. "I don't mean to press, but it does look like you have more than enough availability. I would be happy to wait, or if a table opens up, I wouldn't mind being notified." The hostess crossed her arms, her expression growing increasingly cold. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with irritation, "I don't think this is the kind of establishment that suits you. There are plenty of other places nearby that might be more suitable." The implication was clear, and Rebecca felt a surge of indignation rise within her. For the first time, she realized the issue went beyond her attire or a simple misunderstanding. This was a direct attempt to dismiss her based solely on the perception that she somehow didn't belong in her own establishment. Before Rebecca could say another word, the hostess gave her a final dismissive look and turned her attention back to the tablet, effectively ending the conversation. Rebecca's heart pounded with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. How could this be happening? And why did her own staff think it was acceptable to treat anyone this way? Determined to keep her identity concealed for now, Rebecca turned away from the podium and began walking back toward the lobby. As she did, she noticed a couple entering the restaurant. They, too, approached the hostess without a reservation, but instead of being turned away, they were greeted with a smile, escorted to one of the reserved tables, and handed menus with a warm welcome. Rebecca's heart sank further, realizing that this wasn't an isolated incident. Her staff was making assumptions about who was worthy of their best service and who was not. As she watched the couple settle into their table, her thoughts were interrupted by a stern voice from behind her. "Ma'am, we need you to leave." Rebecca turned around, surprised to see two uniformed security guards standing behind her, both with firm expressions. Her initial shock quickly shifted to incredulity. She hadn't caused a scene, hadn't raised her voice, and yet here were security guards treating her as if she were some kind of troublemaker. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and frustration. "Is there a problem?" One of the guards stepped forward. "We've been informed that you're causing a disturbance and that management would prefer if you vacated the premises." Rebecca was at a loss for words. A disturbance? She had been nothing but polite, even in the face of the subtle and not-so-subtle dismissals she'd experienced. Her frustration, which she had kept bottled up, began to peak. But she knew that if she lost her composure, it would only confirm the assumptions they had already made about her. "I'm a paying guest," she replied, struggling to keep her tone steady. "I've done nothing wrong and have simply been trying to enjoy the amenities of the hotel. I don't see why I'm being asked to leave." The guard's expression softened slightly, as if realizing how unfair the situation was, but he quickly masked it, maintaining his professional stance. "We're just following orders, ma'am. If you refuse to leave, we'll have to escort you out." Rebecca took a deep breath, glancing around the lobby. Other guests were beginning to stare, whispering among themselves as they watched the scene unfold. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, a bitter sensation rising in her throat. She was the owner of this establishment, and yet she was being treated as if she were some kind of trespasser. She was tempted, in that very moment, to reveal her identity to make these guards understand that she was not someone they could have easily pushed her around, but she refrained from reacting. Acting out of anger wouldn't help. It would only cloud her judgment and make it harder for her to uncover the root of the issue. Besides, she wanted to understand just how widespread this treatment was. If they were willing to act this way toward her, a stranger in their eyes, how many other guests had been subjected to the same hostility? "All right," she said, her voice controlled but firm. "I'll leave." She turned and walked slowly toward the exit, aware of the security guards trailing closely behind. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she took a moment to collect her thoughts. The experience had been humiliating, to say the least, but it had also instilled in her a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't going to walk away from this. Her hotel was her life's work, and she couldn't stand by and let it become a place where anyone was treated as inferior. She pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant, Emma, who picked up on the first ring. "Emma, we have a serious issue," Rebecca said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I need you to meet me first thing tomorrow morning in the office. We're going to get to the bottom of this." Emma's tone immediately shifted, sensing the gravity in Rebecca's voice. "Of course, Rebecca. What happened?" Rebecca hesitated, not wanting to go into the details over the phone. "It's a long story, but I'm starting to think there's a culture of discrimination happening right under my nose. I need to understand how deep this goes and who's responsible. We're going to investigate, but I need you to help me keep this quiet for now." Emma agreed without hesitation, and they arranged a time to meet the next day. Rebecca hung up and took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just a guest enduring dismissive glances and rude comments. Now, she was an owner on a mission to reclaim the hotel she had built and ensure it truly reflected her values of respect and hospitality for everyone. As she walked away from the hotel, Rebecca felt the sting of the night's events. The way she had been treated by her own staff was appalling, but it had opened her eyes to a reality she couldn't ignore. She now understood that her presence as a silent observer, hidden from the staff's awareness, had exposed truths she wouldn't have seen otherwise. Her decision to go undercover had given her invaluable insight, and while it had been painful, it was necessary. She resolved to return, this time even more committed to uncovering the full extent of the issue. Tomorrow, she would step back into her role as the hotel's owner, not to flaunt her authority, but to ensure that her hotel, her dream, became the inclusive, respectful space she had always envisioned. The next morning, Rebecca met her assistant, Emma, in her office. Rebecca detailed the humiliating encounters she had experienced as a guest, recounting how the staff had treated her with blatant disregard, turning her away, ignoring her, and even having security escort her from her own hotel. Emma listened, her expression shifting from shock to anger as the story unfolded. "We need to get to the bottom of this, but we can't just rely on what happened yesterday," Rebecca said. "I want to see if this is an isolated case or if it's part of a pattern that affects other guests. I'll need to go undercover again, but this time we'll be strategic about it." Emma nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "Whatever you need, I'm here to help." Rebecca explained her plan. She would return to the hotel under a false name, posing as a new guest checking in for a few days. This time, she would fully immerse herself in the experience, testing not only the reception and restaurant staff, but also room service, housekeeping, and any other services the hotel offered. Emma quickly arranged a reservation under the name Renee Grant, ensuring that no one on the team would recognize it. They chose a room in one of the standard categories, so her stay would reflect the experience of a typical guest. When evening came, Rebecca arrived at the hotel once more, her cover fully in place. She wore a modest dress and minimal accessories, presenting a refined but simple appearance. Her goal was to blend in as much as possible, avoiding any indicators that might make the staff suspicious. She approached the front desk with a calm resolve, determined to see this plan through. A young woman, different from the receptionist Rebecca had encountered the day before, greeted her with a warm smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Crescent Bay Hotel. How can I assist you?" Rebecca felt a glimmer of relief at the polite greeting but reminded herself to stay cautious. "I have a reservation under the name Renee Grant," she replied. The woman quickly typed into her computer, her smile unwavering. "Yes, Ms. Grant. I see your reservation for a 3-night stay. Let me get you checked in." She processed the reservation efficiently and handed Rebecca her key card with a friendly nod. "If you need any assistance, please don't hesitate to let us know." The check-in experience was smooth and professional, a stark contrast to the dismissive treatment she had received the day before. Rebecca thanked the receptionist and made her way to her room, already noting how differently she had been treated this time. Once she was settled in her room, Rebecca planned her next move. She decided to test room service, curious to see if there would be any inconsistencies. In the way the situation was handled, she picked up the phone and placed a simple dinner order, a club sandwich with a side of fries and a glass of sparkling water. The voice on the other end was courteous, assuring her that her order would arrive in 30 minutes. Exactly 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Rebecca opened it to find a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed uniform holding a tray with her meal. His manner was polite and professional, though she sensed a slight shift in his expression as he took in her appearance. It was just a fleeting moment, but she noticed how his gaze lingered on her simple attire. She thanked him, tipping generously, and watched as he quickly averted his eyes and offered a hasty goodbye. Rebecca sighed, wondering if she was overanalyzing these interactions, but she trusted her instincts. There was an underlying tension in some of the staff's reactions, a faint discomfort that seemed to stem from her appearance. She made sure to take notes, determined to keep a detailed record of every interaction she encountered. The next morning, Rebecca decided to visit the hotel spa, one of the property's most praised features, offering a range of luxurious treatments designed to leave guests feeling refreshed and pampered. She approached the spa's reception area, where a woman greeted her with a smile that quickly faded as she looked Rebecca up and down. "Good morning," Rebecca said politely. "I'd like to book a massage." The receptionist hesitated, her gaze briefly flickering over Rebecca's simple outfit. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Rebecca shook her head. "No, I was hoping there might be an opening later today." The woman gave a small, tight smile. "I'll have to check," she said, tapping on her computer. Though Rebecca could sense her reluctance, the receptionist finally spoke. "It looks like we're fully booked for the day. I might be able to fit you in tomorrow, but we prioritize reservations." Rebecca nodded, sensing the familiar chill she had felt from other staff members. She couldn't help but notice how other guests, dressed in fine clothes, were welcomed warmly and offered spa treatments without hesitation. Feeling disheartened, Rebecca left the spa, adding another note to her growing list of observations. Throughout the day, Rebecca continued to test various areas of the hotel. She visited the pool, observed the service in the lounge, and interacted with housekeeping. Her observations were consistent. Guests who appeared wealthy or fashionable were greeted enthusiastically and attended to right away, while those who seemed less affluent, like herself, in her current attire, were either ignored or treated with polite indifference. In the evening, Rebecca decided to dine at the restaurant once again. This time, she was seated without any trouble, though the host still regarded her with a faintly skeptical expression. As she observed the other diners, she noticed the contrast in how the waitstaff interacted with guests. For those in expensive clothing or jewelry, the service was attentive and cheerful, while those in simpler attire received noticeably less attention. Rebecca's mind raced as she connected the dots. A clear pattern was emerging, one that exposed a deeply ingrained bias within her staff's attitudes toward guests. It wasn't just about professionalism or efficiency. It was a cultural issue rooted in appearance-based judgments. Her own staff, the people she trusted to uphold the values of her establishment, were dividing guests into worthy and unworthy categories based on little more than their outward appearance. As she finished her meal, Rebecca felt a growing sense of urgency to address the issue. She knew she couldn't continue running her hotel in good conscience while allowing this behavior to go unchecked. Her undercover experience had revealed an unpleasant truth, but it also gave her the insight needed to bring about real change. When she returned to her room that night, Rebecca called Emma to discuss her findings. "I've seen enough," she said, her voice resolute. "It's not just a few individuals. This is a widespread issue." Emma's response was filled with determination. "What's our next step?" "We're going to address this from the top down," Rebecca replied. "We'll start with an investigation to gather more details and statements from employees who might have witnessed this behavior. Then we'll confront the individuals responsible for creating and perpetuating this culture. And if it goes higher up, we'll deal with that too." As Rebecca hung up, she felt a mixture of relief and anger. Her mission was now clear. She had come to her hotel as an anonymous guest to understand the guest experience, and what she had uncovered was a far-reaching culture of bias and discrimination. It was painful to realize that her establishment had strayed so far from her ideals, but she knew she was the only one who could set things right. With a final look around her room, Rebecca steeled herself for the challenges ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to rebuild her hotel's reputation from the inside out. No guest, no matter their background, appearance, or perceived status, would ever feel unwelcome in her hotel again. The following day, Rebecca and Emma sat in Rebecca's office, going over documents and records that Emma had carefully gathered. These weren't just any records. Emma had uncovered files containing guest complaints and feedback spanning several years. While most reviews painted the hotel in a positive light, there were disturbing patterns hidden within. Several complaints highlighted a recurring issue. Certain guests, often those who didn't fit the luxury image, were receiving subpar treatment. These complaints had either been downplayed or ignored entirely, swept under the rug to protect the hotel's pristine reputation. Rebecca felt a pang of guilt as she read through each complaint. Guests described feeling ignored, dismissed, or spoken to rudely by the staff, especially when they were casually dressed or appeared to be from a lower economic background. Some guests even noted that they had been turned away from the restaurant, even when tables were clearly vacant, just as Rebecca had experienced. Others reported being overlooked by staff who seemed to prioritize guests who appeared wealthier. Emma flipped to a particularly disturbing complaint from a guest who had requested an upgraded room but was moved to a smaller one without any explanation. When the guest inquired about the change, they were told there were no available upgrades, despite seeing other guests receiving them upon request. The guest left a frustrated comment, feeling as though they had been judged and devalued based on their appearance alone. "It's clear there's a systemic issue here," Emma said, her voice serious as she looked up from the documents. "These aren't isolated incidents, Rebecca. This has been going on for a while." Rebecca sighed, leaning back in her chair and pinching the bridge of her nose. "How did we let it get to this point?" she muttered almost to herself. "I never wanted my hotel to be a place where people were judged by their appearance or treated differently because of their background." Emma hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else I discovered," she said cautiously. "I've been talking to some of the staff, and one of them, a longtime employee named Maria, mentioned something important. She agreed to speak with you directly, but she hinted that someone higher up might be behind these practices." Rebecca's heart sank. "Who?" "His name is Mr. Anderson," Emma replied. "He's one of the senior managers in guest relations. According to Maria, he's been subtly promoting these standards, encouraging staff to prioritize certain types of guests over others. He never gives direct orders, but his preferences are well known among the team." Rebecca felt a wave of frustration. Mr. Anderson had been with the hotel since its early days, and she had always trusted him to uphold the highest standards of hospitality. If he was behind this, it meant the problem ran deeper than she had first realized. She couldn't shake the disappointment in discovering that someone she had considered a reliable manager could be contributing to the toxic culture that had taken root in her hotel. "Can you arrange a meeting with Maria?" Rebecca asked, her voice calm but resolute. "I need to hear directly from her." Emma nodded, already pulling out her phone to contact Maria. Within minutes, they had arranged for Maria to meet with Rebecca later that afternoon. Rebecca prepared herself for the conversation, her mind racing with questions and concerns. She wanted to understand the full scope of the issue, and Maria might be the key to unlocking the truth. That afternoon, Maria arrived at Rebecca's office looking visibly anxious. She was a middle-aged woman who had been with the hotel for nearly a decade, working quietly as part of the housekeeping staff. Her years of service were evident in the way she carried herself. Though she was nervous, there was a strength and resilience in her gaze. Rebecca offered her a comforting smile. "Thank you for coming, Maria. I appreciate your willingness to speak with me." Maria nodded, fidgeting slightly with the hem of her uniform. "Thank you, Miss Taylor. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. I didn't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble," Rebecca reassured her. "I just want to understand what's been happening. Please tell me everything you've noticed." Maria took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before she began. "I've been with the hotel for a long time, Miss Taylor. I remember when it first opened, and I know how much effort you put into making it a welcoming place for everyone. But over the past few years, things have changed." Rebecca leaned in, listening intently. "It started subtly," Maria continued. "Small things at first. We were told to spend extra time on rooms booked by guests who appeared wealthy to ensure they were comfortable. At first, I didn't think much of it. It made sense to provide excellent service, especially to guests who could help the hotel's reputation, but it didn't stop there." Maria went on, her tone growing more somber. "Gradually, it became clear that certain guests, Those who didn't look like they fit the luxury image were being treated differently. They'd be given less attention, or sometimes, if they asked for special accommodations, their requests would be denied without much consideration. Rebecca felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she listened. "Did Mr. Anderson play a role in this?" she asked gently. Maria nodded slowly, her eyes darting to Emma before returning to Rebecca. "Yes, but not directly. He never said outright to treat people differently, but his attitude made it clear who he thought deserved priority. Whenever there was a complaint from a wealthy guest, he'd make a fuss, insisting we do whatever it took to make them happy. But if the complaint came from someone he deemed less important, he'd dismiss it, saying we couldn't cater to every single request." Rebecca clenched her fists, trying to keep her emotions in check. "So, he created an environment where certain guests were subtly encouraged to feel like second-class citizens." Maria nodded, looking down at her hands. "It's like there's an unspoken rule. I know other staff members feel it too. They know Mr. Anderson's preferences, and they follow his lead to avoid any trouble." Rebecca took a deep breath, processing everything she'd heard. She was angry, disappointed, and hurt that this had been happening under her watch. Mr. Anderson's influence had tainted the culture she had worked so hard to cultivate, a culture that was supposed to be rooted in respect and inclusivity. "Thank you for your honesty, Maria," Rebecca said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "It takes courage to speak up, and I promise you we're going to address this." Maria offered a tentative smile. "I'm glad to hear that, Miss Taylor. There are so many good people here, and we want the hotel to be the place you envisioned." Rebecca nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "It will be," she replied firmly. "Thank you again, Maria. Your feedback is invaluable." As Maria left, Rebecca turned to Emma, her face set with resolve. "We need to gather more evidence. If Mr. Anderson has been manipulating staff and fostering a culture of discrimination, we can't just confront him without proof." Emma nodded. "I'll reach out to a few other employees I trust. We can ask them for any additional details or incidents they've witnessed, and I'll continue going through the guest complaints to identify any further patterns." "Good," Rebecca said, her mind already working on the next steps. "I won't allow this behavior to continue, no matter how senior or respected Mr. Anderson is within the company. The culture of my hotel, my brand, and my values are at stake, and I will do whatever it takes to restore them. The truth is out there, and now, with your help, Emma, I'm determined to bring it all to light. The Crescent Bay Hotel will no longer be a place where discrimination is tolerated." As she steeled herself for the battle ahead, Rebecca knew that this was just the beginning. It was time to confront the problem head-on. The frontline manager, armed with her experiences as a guest and the insights from Emma and Maria, Rebecca felt prepared to approach the staff, beginning with the frontline manager, Oliver, who had overseen daily operations for years. Oliver was a seasoned employee who had always seemed committed to maintaining the hotel's standards, but Rebecca needed answers. She wanted to know what he knew about the biases that had taken root in her hotel. Rebecca arranged a private meeting with Oliver in her office. As he entered, he appeared slightly uneasy, likely unaware of the reason for the meeting but sensing that something serious was at hand. Rebecca invited him to sit, observing him closely as she gathered her thoughts. "Thank you for joining me, Oliver," she began, her tone calm but firm. "I wanted to discuss something important regarding the culture and practices here at Crescent Bay. I'm sure you know by now that I've been staying at the hotel as a guest, anonymously." Oliver's eyes widened slightly, a look of surprise flashing across his face. "Oh, I wasn't aware of that," he replied, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Is everything all right with your stay?" Rebecca nodded, though her expression remained serious. "Yes and no. I went undercover to experience the hotel from the perspective of an ordinary guest. What I discovered was both eye-opening and deeply troubling." She paused, watching as Oliver's expression shifted to one of confusion and concern. "I encountered several instances where I was treated as if I didn't belong. I was turned away from the restaurant, dismissed by reception staff, and even asked to leave the premises by security. It was clear I was being judged based on my appearance. Oliver's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Rebecca raised her hand, stopping him. Please let me finish. I've also reviewed several years' worth of guest complaints and feedback. Unfortunately, it seems my experience wasn't unique. Many guests who don't fit the typical image of a luxury guest have been treated the same way. They've been ignored, dismissed, and even denied services that were available to others. Oliver's face reflected a mixture of guilt and shock. I had no idea, he stammered, his voice shaky. Miss Taylor, I assure you, I never intended for this to happen. Rebecca's gaze was unwavering. Whether you intended it or not, it has happened, and it's clear to me that this issue goes beyond individual staff members. It's a cultural problem, one that has infected the way our team approaches hospitality. As the manager overseeing daily operations, I need to know, how did this slip by you? Oliver's shoulders drooped, and he let out a shaky sigh. I knew there were preferences, certain unspoken expectations about the types of guests who were encouraged to stay here, but I always thought it was just about upholding the hotel's image. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. Rebecca's patience was running thin. What do you mean by preferences? Who set these expectations? Oliver hesitated, a pained expression crossing his face. Mr. Anderson, he admitted quietly. He's made it clear over the years that we should focus our efforts on maintaining a certain standard. He never outright instructed us to treat certain guests differently, but he would make subtle comments, suggestions about who we should or shouldn't go out of our way for. Rebecca clenched her fists, keeping her composure despite the anger rising within her. So, Mr. Anderson has been quietly influencing the staff to prioritize certain guests while marginalizing others. Oliver nodded, his gaze downcast. Yes, but he's very careful. He never gives explicit instructions, just suggestions. He phrases it as being in the best interest of the hotel's reputation, as if catering to only a certain type of guest is what makes us successful. Rebecca's heart sank. The picture was becoming clearer, but it was also more troubling than she had anticipated. Mr. Anderson, someone she had trusted to uphold the values of her establishment, had instead been fostering a culture of elitism and bias. And while he hadn't directly ordered anyone to discriminate, his influence had shaped the staff's attitudes, creating an environment where these practices were subtly encouraged. What about you, Oliver? She asked, her voice softer now. How did you respond to Mr. Anderson's influence? Oliver's face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't think it was my place. I should have done more. Place to challenge him? He's a senior manager, and he's always been well respected here. I didn't want to jeopardize my position by questioning his judgment, so I kept quiet. And I realize now that my silence contributed to the issue. I should have done more to protect the integrity of the hotel, Oliver confessed. Rebecca took a deep breath, both disappointed and somewhat understanding of the pressure Oliver must have felt. She knew Mr. Anderson's reputation. He was known for his experience and connections, and challenging him could have seemed daunting to any of his subordinates. Still, that didn't excuse the fact that Oliver had allowed these practices to go unchecked. Oliver, she said, her tone softening slightly, I appreciate your honesty. I understand that you were in a tough spot, but as the frontline manager, you had a duty to address these issues and ensure that every guest felt welcomed and valued. He nodded, clearly remorseful. You're right, Miss Taylor. I failed in that regard. I let Mr. Anderson's preferences shape the way we treated people, and I'm sorry for that. Rebecca sat back, considering her next steps. She had gathered enough insight to know that Mr. Anderson was the primary instigator of this discriminatory culture. But she also understood that his influence was so deeply rooted that confronting him directly without solid proof could be problematic. If she accused him outright, he could easily deny everything, potentially turning the tables by claiming she had misunderstood his intentions. She needed to build a case, something irrefutable, that would expose his actions and make it clear to everyone that this behavior would no longer be tolerated. Here's what we're going to do, Rebecca said finally, locking eyes with Oliver. First, I want a thorough review of our service practices across every department. I want to know exactly how guests are being treated, especially those who might not fit Mr. Anderson's ideal image. Emma and I will help with this, and I expect full cooperation from you and the rest of the staff." Oliver nodded, his expression resolute. "Of course, Miss Taylor. I'll support you in any way I can." "Second," Rebecca continued, "I want you to begin documenting any instances where you observe or hear about discriminatory practices. And I don't just mean direct actions. I want to know about any comments, suggestions, or attitudes that contribute to this culture. We need evidence to confront Mr. Anderson directly, and I plan to have a conversation with him once we have a full picture." Oliver hesitated, then nodded. "Understood. I'll do everything I can to help." Rebecca leaned forward, her gaze intense. "And finally, I need you to understand that this behavior will no longer be tolerated from anyone. The Crescent Bay Hotel was built to be a place where every guest, no matter their appearance or background, is treated with respect and dignity. We're going to rebuild our reputation and our culture, and that starts now." Oliver's eyes met hers, and she could see a flicker of relief and determination in his expression. "Thank you, Miss Taylor. I'm committed to making things right." Rebecca felt a spark of hope. This confrontation had been difficult, but it was a necessary step. She was beginning to piece together the full scope of the problem, and with Oliver's help, she was one step closer to holding Mr. Anderson accountable. As Oliver left the office, Rebecca took a deep breath, steadying herself for the challenges that lay ahead. Confronting Mr. Anderson would be no small task, but she was prepared. She had always envisioned her hotel as a place of inclusivity and warmth, and she wouldn't let one person's influence tarnish that vision any longer. Over the coming days, she would gather more evidence, interview staff members, and review every guest interaction, determined to root out the toxic culture Mr. Anderson had fostered. And when the time came, she would face him directly, armed with the truth, to reclaim the Crescent Bay Hotel's values. Rebecca dove deeper into her investigation with Emma's invaluable support, determined to eliminate the toxic influence that had corroded her hotel's culture. With Oliver's cooperation and Emma's resourcefulness, they began gathering tangible evidence of Mr. Anderson's biased policies, documenting patterns of discriminatory behavior, and compiling witness statements from employees willing to share their experiences. But as Rebecca sifted through guest complaints, staff testimonies, and financial records, Emma made a startling discovery. While reviewing the hotel's budget reports and transactions, she found a series of suspiciously high expenditures that didn't match any known hotel projects or regular expenses. The payments were small enough to avoid raising immediate suspicion, but over time, they had added up to a significant sum. After a closer look, they realized these funds had been funneled into accounts not registered under any of the hotel's legitimate departments or projects. Rebecca's stomach dropped as the pieces fell into place. It was bad enough that Mr. Anderson had influenced the staff to discriminate against certain guests, but now there was clear evidence he had been siphoning money from the hotel. This wasn't just a matter of poor ethics, it was a criminal offense. "We need to be absolutely sure of this before we move forward," Rebecca said to Emma, her voice steady but resolute. "If Mr. Anderson has been embezzling funds, I need to know exactly how deep this goes. We can't confront him without hard evidence. That proves his guilt beyond a doubt." Emma nodded, her expression equally resolute. "I'll keep digging and reach out to the accounting team discreetly to see if they've noticed anything unusual in the financials." Over the next several days, Emma continued to sift through records, while Rebecca conducted confidential interviews with employees who had previously worked under Mr. Anderson. Many of them expressed relief that someone was finally investigating his behavior. Several staff members recounted how Mr. Anderson had subtly pressured them to prioritize guests who fit the luxury image, while discouraging them from going the extra mile for others. They confirmed that Mr. Anderson's preferences were an unspoken rule, one enforced with the threat of consequences for those who didn't comply. Emma's research also yielded critical information. Several discrepancies in invoices and payments directly tied to Mr. Anderson's oversight. The funds appeared to have been redirected through a complicated series of transactions, but Emma's persistence helped her trace the trail back to a personal account that, after further investigation, turned out to belong to Mr. Anderson. It was the proof Rebecca had been waiting for, evidence of both his discriminatory actions and his financial misconduct. With the mounting evidence, Rebecca devised a strategy. She would confront Mr. Anderson directly, but she would also involve one of the board members who had supported her vision for the hotel from the beginning. She wanted to ensure that this wasn't just a private matter between her and Anderson. The corruption ran too deep for that. She needed to make it clear that this behavior was unacceptable, and those responsible would face consequences. Rebecca arranged a private meeting in the hotel's boardroom, inviting both Mr. Anderson and Mr. Thorne, a respected board member known for his integrity and dedication to the hotel's mission. Mr. Anderson arrived first, his confident demeanor unchanged, clearly unaware of the purpose of the meeting. Mr. Thorne entered shortly afterward, exchanging a warm but concerned nod with Rebecca as he took his seat. "Thank you both for joining me," Rebecca began, her tone calm but authoritative. "I've asked you here today to address a serious issue within the hotel." Mr. Anderson raised an eyebrow, his expression faintly dismissive. "Of course, Miss Taylor. I'm always happy to assist with any matters regarding our guest's experience." Rebecca gave him a steady look, her voice unwavering. "Mr. Anderson, I've been conducting an investigation over the past several weeks, observing the behavior of our staff, reviewing guest complaints, and examining financial records. What I've uncovered is not only disappointing, but unacceptable." A flicker of concern crossed Mr. Anderson's face, though he quickly masked it. "I'm not sure I understand," he said smoothly. Rebecca didn't flinch. She pulled out a folder filled with documentation and opened it, sliding several guest complaints and statements from employees across the table. "These are reports from guests who have felt unwelcome in our hotel, ignored, dismissed, or outright turned away because they didn't fit a certain image. I also have statements from staff members who confirmed they were pressured to prioritize certain guests while marginalizing others." Mr. Anderson's face hardened. "I'm sure you're mistaken, Miss Taylor. We uphold high standards here, and sometimes certain guests don't meet those standards." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, her tone firm. "Our high standards were never meant to discriminate against guests based on appearance or economic status. That's a culture you've fostered, Mr. Anderson. A culture that has no place at Crescent Bay Hotel." Before he could respond, Rebecca continued, "And that's not all I've uncovered. I've also found discrepancies in the hotel's financial records, transactions that have been siphoned from our accounts and redirected to a personal account." "Your account, Mr. Anderson." For the first time, Mr. Anderson's face went pale. His confidence faltered, and his hands gripped the edge of the table. He stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. This must be some kind of mistake." Rebecca remained calm, gesturing to Emma, who handed over the financial documents they had compiled. "I have documentation of every transaction, including the account details. This is embezzlement, plain and simple. You've not only misled our staff and tarnished our reputation, but you've stolen from the hotel to fund your personal interests." Mr. Thorne, who had been silently observing, finally spoke, his voice firm. "Mr. Anderson, is this true? Have you been manipulating both staff and finances?" Mr. Anderson's face flushed with panic as he realized there was no way out. He stammered, his confident facade now in ruins. It's not what it looks like. I was only trying to maintain the hotel's image, to make it profitable. Certain guests just didn't fit." Rebecca cut him off, her voice like steel. "This hotel was built to welcome everyone, not to serve the narrow vision of luxury you've imposed. As for the funds you've taken, I'll be pressing charges. This is theft, and it's a betrayal of everything we stand for." Mr. Thorne shook his head, his disappointment evident. "I supported you for years, Mr. Anderson, believing you shared our commitment to the hotel's values. But this behavior is unacceptable." Mr. Anderson sat there, stunned and silent, as the weight of his actions sank in. He was left with no defense, his reputation shattered by his own misconduct. Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling the tension in the room ease as the confrontation came to a close. She had accomplished what she set out to do: expose the truth, protect the integrity of her hotel, and hold those responsible accountable. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her tone final, "you're relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Mr. Thorne and I will ensure that the necessary legal actions are taken." With that, Mr. Anderson rose shakily from his chair, realizing his defeat. He cast one last bitter glance at Rebecca before leaving the room. His career at Crescent Bay Hotel in ruins, Mr. Anderson left. As he exited, Rebecca turned to Mr. Thorne, who gave her a nod of respect. "You handled this with remarkable strength, Rebecca. I'm confident that the hotel is in capable hands." Rebecca smiled, feeling a deep sense of relief. It had been a challenging journey, but her dedication to restoring the hotel's reputation and culture had never wavered. Now, with Mr. Anderson gone and a clear path ahead, she could finally begin the process of rebuilding, ensuring that Crescent Bay Hotel would once again be a place of inclusivity, respect, and integrity, just as she had always envisioned. As the dust settled after her confrontation with Mr. Anderson, Rebecca took a moment to reflect on the journey that had led her to this point. She had uncovered not only the discrimination that had been poisoning the culture of her beloved hotel, but also the corruption at the highest levels. The experience had been painful and discouraging, yet it had revealed the strength within her to protect the values she cherished and the vision she had for Crescent Bay Hotel. In the days that followed, Rebecca implemented sweeping reforms to restore trust not only among her guests but also within her team. She began by introducing comprehensive training programs aimed at instilling a commitment to inclusivity and respect. The sessions focused on fostering a service mindset based on empathy and equality, ensuring that every staff member understood the importance of treating each guest with the same level of respect, regardless of their appearance or background. Rebecca also introduced policies for transparency and accountability, setting clear expectations for staff behavior and providing a safe platform for employees to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Anonymous feedback channels allowed staff members to report any discriminatory practices or mistreatment they observed. Rebecca knew that real change required consistent vigilance and the trust of her employees, and she was committed to creating an environment where open communication could thrive. To reinforce her vision, Rebecca held regular meetings with her management team, emphasizing the hotel's mission as a place of warmth, inclusivity, and luxury for all. She actively involved staff in discussions about the hotel's values, encouraging them to share their ideas and perspectives. This collaborative approach fostered a renewed sense of pride and unity, helping everyone feel personally invested in the hotel's success. Rebecca's reforms began to make a noticeable impact. Guests who had once felt neglected now received the same level of attentiveness as everyone else. Staff morale improved as employees felt empowered to deliver genuine hospitality, free from the unspoken pressures that had previously dictated their actions. The hotel regained its reputation as a place of elegance and welcome, not just for the wealthy or stylish, but for all who walked through its doors. Reflecting on the journey, Rebecca felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her experience had taught her that building a successful business wasn't just about luxury and appearances. It was about fostering a culture of integrity and respect. By confronting the corruption within her own establishment, she had reclaimed the hotel's values and set it on a path toward a brighter, more inclusive future. As Rebecca looked out over the lobby, bustling with guests from all backgrounds, she felt an overwhelming sense of hope and empowerment. Crescent Bay Hotel was now a symbol of fairness, transparency, and hospitality, a place where everyone was welcome. Her commitment to these principles would ensure that her hotel continued to stand as a beacon of respect and inclusivity for years to come.